All right, welcome back for another great edition of advanced algebra videos, properties of real numbers today, and also absolute value. And here we go. Properties we're going to work on this today and tomorrow are what, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 7 of them. First one is called commutative. Commutative is the most mispronounced word in math in Tennessee. It does not have an N in it. A lot of people want to say commutative property. It is commutative. Works for addition and multiplication. All it says is it doesn't matter which order you add. 3 plus 7, 7 plus 3. The order doesn't matter. 3 times 7, 7 times 3. Works with addition, and multiplication does not work with subtraction or division, so be careful. The associative property is next. You've seen these your whole life. Associative property just means it doesn't matter if it's all addition. Doesn't matter which way you group the numbers. You get the same result. Same way with multiplication. Doesn't matter how you group them, and you're going to get the same result, called associative. Comes from commutative. Again, doesn't matter which order you do things. The grouping symbols make you do things in a certain order, and it doesn't matter which order you do things in as long as it's addition, multiplication. Additive identity. Remember identity by doing this. A plus 0, 0 plus a. 0 is called the additive identity because whatever you add to it, the number keeps the same identity. Like we started with an A, you ended with an A because it kept its identity. So it's additive identity. The multiplicative identity is down here. I'm skipping one. Multiplicative identity is 1 because if you multiply something by 1, the number keeps its same identity. A times 1 is A. 1 times A is A. Keeps the same identity. Additive inverse. The word inverse means opposite. It's just adding opposites. So when you add opposites, you always get 0. That's how you know you did the inverse property. Additive inverse is you added opposites. Multiplicative inverse is a little bit different. It's opposites also, but it's not multiplying opposite numbers. It's actually multiplying reciprocals and getting a result of 1. Anytime you multiply reciprocals, you always get 1. The fancy name for reciprocal is the multiplicative inverse. That's how you can remember it. And probably the property used the most in Algebra 1 is called distributive. When you have a number outside of a grouping symbol or even a variable, you distribute it across the whole parentheses, multiply by everything in there. The sign that's inside comes over with it, and that's called distributive property. And you use that tons in Algebra 1 and probably some in geometry as well. Okay, what they're going to do first tomorrow in class is they're going to give a problem like this, like just state what the property is. And if you look at the first one, if you look at A up there, they just went from 8 times 5 to 5 times 8. That's the commutative property of multiplication. Part B, if you look at this one, the order is the same, 5mn, 5mn, but they group them differently. That would be associative property. Be careful how you abbreviate associative. Make sure you go all the way to the C of addition. Part C, they added opposites. Remember opposites, inverse is another word for that because they're adding. We would say that's the additive inverse. My marker's kind of going crazy on me here. Sorry about that. Part D, multiplied by 1. Remember 1, the 6 keeps the same identity all the way through, and because it's multiplication, it's the multiplicative identity. So we'll call it the mult identity. And the last one, they took the 2 right here in front of the grouping symbol and distributed it all the way through, so it's this distributive property, the distributive. And so the first part of tomorrow's lesson, when you come into classes, will be just naming properties, and you've done that before. Absolute value is the last part today. Definition, sometimes I'll ask people what the absolute value is, and they always say, well, it makes something positive. It's always positive. And that's not really true. It's not always positive, but I know why they're saying that. The reason is because it's the distance a number is from 0 on the number line. Distance can never be negative. You can't get up and walk negative 5 feet. You just can't do it. So when you see the absolute value symbols, like absolute value 31, that's asking you how far is 31 away from 0. Well, it's 31 units away from 0. How far is negative 7 away from 0? It's 7 away from 0. How far is 0 away from 0? It's 0 away. And that is why you can't say it always makes it positive, because the absolute value of 0 is not positive. It's just 0. This is hard, kind of weird to read, but it really makes sense, and it's a good thing here if you can kind of figure it out. I'm going to kind of talk you through it. This says the absolute value of A is itself is just A if it's a positive number. The absolute value is the opposite of itself if it's a negative number. On the last slide I had this. I had absolute value of 31, and it was 31. If it's a positive number inside absolute value, the absolute value is itself. I also had a negative 7, and the absolute value was 7. If you have the absolute value of a negative number, it's the opposite of itself. That's really good to know, and it's going to come into play later when we start doing equations with the absolute value in them. But just the sentence is kind of hard to read. There's a lot of math words in there, but that's what it's saying. The absolute value of a positive number is itself. The absolute value of a negative number is its opposite. One use we're going to do with absolute value today is find the distance between 2 points on a number line. And all you do, this is the one time in your life you get to do this, is you subtract the two numbers. And it doesn't matter which order you subtract them in because you're going to take the absolute value. Remember, absolute value is distance. It's distance on a number line. Absolute value is distance away from 0, but the distance between 2 points you can subtract and just take their absolute value because absolute value measures distance. So last slide says find the distance between negative 2 and 3. You have two options. You can do negative 2 minus 3 inside absolute value. Hopefully you know that that is really negative 5, and the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. You could also do 3 minus negative 2, and hopefully you know that's really 3 plus 2, which is 5, and the absolute value of 5 is 5. So to find the distance between any 2 points on a number line, just subtract, find their absolute value. That's all you got to do. We'll do work on these tomorrow when you come in. Have a good rest of the day. See you tomorrow.